Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Hawkins. The show is called My Strategy. We are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today, we're going to be talking about stop apologizing and start using this technique instead. Many people don't realize there's downsides to saying they're sorry. And in many situations, there is another technique that you can use to gain credibility. All right. Well, very happy to be here with you today and glad you could join us again. Saturday is a great day of the week to reflect on the prior week and think about what you've accomplished and your plans for the upcoming week. But keep in mind that any time is a good time to assess your personal development strategy, because that's what we do here at the My Strategy radio show. Now, the radio show continues to grow. We're on iHeart, iTunes, Player FM, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spreaker, and also many of the digital platforms in podcast format, so you can find this show there. You can find me on many social media platforms. My Twitter handle is @HawkinsJohn. That's @HawkinsJohn. My website is johnmhawkins.com. And just like anything in life, we need to have a strategy and a plan to help us reach our goals, because the best laid plans don't always work. This week, I'm looking for your stories, on saying sorry. Do you have any examples, perhaps a tip or a trick that you would like to send to us? You can send it to talk@johnmhawkins.com. Well, today, as I said, we're going to be talking about stop apologizing and use this technique. We'll talk a little bit about what apologizing is and the impact it can have on customers, on your friends, family members, and others. It's a very easy habit to get into, and it is effective, but there are some downsides of constantly apologizing. Empathy is one of those skills that we need to develop, and empathy is a way for us to connect with people. And this new technique I'm going to talk about, or this old technique, but might be new to us or some of you, is a technique that can help you show empathy for someone. Empathy is good for business. It's good for personal life. It's good for your personal development. So being able to express and understand and be empathetic towards someone is good. We'll then talk a little bit about the technique, which is called the Feel, Felt, Found technique, which is a way that you can shift your approach from using sorry to this. We'll give you some examples. And then we're going to help you develop your strategy with Feel, Felt, Found. All right. Got an article here by Sudeep Singh. 7 things you could lose when saying sorry. Sudeep says that saying sorry constantly can have a direct impact on your reputation, and it presents you as a loser. Nobody wants to be presented as a loser. He said people are not going to take you as seriously. Is there anything bad in saying sorry over and over again? Well, most of us believe that using this one word turns you into a humble person, but the reality is somewhat different. When I say sorry, I'm simply confessing my wrongdoings. Not many of us know that when you keep using this one word as a helping verb, you are supposed to lose a lot of things. So he suggests that we should stop using the word sorry. He said, first, confidence. The first thing you can lose is confidence. Let's say you have to deliver a presentation, and you've already dedicated 100% to this effort. But when you start your presentation, you start off with an apology. This is the moment when people might start to doubt your findings. Chance to defend. Saying sorry again and again can put you into trouble and label you as guilty. Take an example where you were involved in an accident, and you are involved in the accident, and the authorities arrive, and you start apologizing for the accident. It assumes that you are guilty or have something to be guilty for. Credibility. Sometimes apologizing too often can directly impact your credibility, even if it's not your mistake. People will see you as a wrongdoer or perhaps someone who did something wrong. And I think this is important when we're trying to do interpersonal relationship building or customer building. If a customer or somebody comes to you and they were wronged by an entity that you represent or perhaps someone in your family, if you say sorry, that might immediately implicate that there is something to be sorry for. So that's where we want to start transitioning out of saying sorry and use the feel, felt, found technique instead. You're going to find that it helps to frame the situation a little bit better. Additionally, this technique is something that salespeople have used for years and years and years. So it is time-tested, and you'll probably recognize it when we get to it later in the show. But it definitely, in my opinion, is something to start trying rather than constantly apologizing for everything. Self-esteem. He says he's not saying that you should never use the word sorry, because if you did something wrong, you should own up to it. But incorrectly using it or using it all the time can impact your self-esteem. What about identity? Undoubtedly, you're going to lose your identity at some point, because once you lose your credibility, respect, nobody will take you seriously. The fact is, with every useless apology, you are going to lose some of your identity. Again, these are the perspectives and views of this author here. And so, essentially, this habit, he says, is going to lower your self-confidence. Things that you need discussions on and perhaps want to discuss, people might not take you seriously because you are always apologizing. So really, here's one perspective from somebody, Sudeep Singh, on why we shouldn't be saying sorry. And I think it's important for us to start thinking about our strategy and how do we approach people. How do we approach them with our verbal and nonverbal skills? And ultimately, those skills that we have and develop can be a leading indicator into how others are going to be responding to us. It is what we say has a direct impact on people. And so what we're saying in this episode is we want to start thinking about how often we use the word sorry. And we really want to start to think about other strategies that we can be using instead to help gain or show empathy of someone else. And then ultimately, it helps with our communication. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming live from the BBM Global Network in TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about empathy. It's one of the key skills that we all need to have. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. The show is called My Strategy. Come to you live. All right, so today we're talking about stop apologizing and start using this technique instead. Right before the break, we were talking about the impact of always apologizing. What is the impact to our customers, relationships, our boss, anyone that we have an interpersonal relationship with or deal with on a daily basis? And what we're trying to uncover is, if we are suggesting you stop apologizing for everything, what are some better techniques that we can use to help achieve a better outcome? And one of the things that I think we want to try and accomplish or achieve as an outcome is demonstrate empathy. Now, empathy is, according to an article I have here, the ability to recognize, understand, and share the thoughts and feelings of another person, animal, or fictional character. Developing empathy is crucial for establishing relationships and behaving compassionately. It involves experiencing another person's point of view rather than just one's own. It enables prosocial or helping behaviors that come from within rather than being forced. And I'm going to pause here and tell you that we did do a whole podcast on empathy. This show is not 100% dedicated to empathy, so if you'd like to learn more about empathy, you can find that podcast by searching for it. All right, so they continue to say that some surveys indicate that empathy is on the decline in the United States and everywhere else. Findings that motivate parents, schools, and communities to support programs that help support people of all ages and enhance and maintain their ability to walk in each other's shoes. I think that's a good way to describe empathy, walking in someone else's shoes, understanding their perspective, their point of view. And in addition to the empathy show, we've also done a show on perspective and point of view. And here's where things start to get a little bit interesting. It says, empathy helps us cooperate with others, build friendships, make moral decisions, and intervene when we see others being bullied. Human beings begin to show signs of empathy in infancy, and the trait develops steadily throughout childhood and their adolescence. And this is where it really gets interesting. Still, most people are likely to feel greater empathy for people that are like themselves and may feel less empathy for those outside of their family, community, ethnicity, or race. So there's a natural tendency for us not to feel as empathetic for those outside of a group to which we belong. So, because of this, that is why I am proposing using a different technique than saying sorry, because sorry doesn't have as much meaning for someone who is outside of a group to which you belong. It could be someone on the street. It could be, somebody who, you happen to run into, or somebody at the counter. And that's where we need to start thinking strategically and using techniques that are going to help overcome the disadvantage that we are at when we are dealing with somebody who is not in one of those social groups or other groups. But why is empathy so important? Empathy helps us connect and help others, but like other traits, it may have evolved with a selfish motive, using others as a social antenna to help detect danger from an evolutionary perspective. Creating a mental model of another person's intent is critical. The arrival of an interloper, for example, could be deadly, so developing sensitivity to the signals of others could be life-saving. The article goes on to talk about how children display empathy, and it talks a little bit about empathy in relationships, and also could a narcissist show empathy. But here's what I want to ruminate on. In this show, we're trying to build our interpersonal skills. This is all about personal development. And what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to walk into a room, any room, anywhere on the planet, and we want to be as effective as we can with our communication to gain rapport so that we can accomplish some goal. It could be, a selfish goal. It could be a personal goal. There's lots and lots of different goals. But from a personal development perspective, we are trying to accomplish something. We are goal-setting people. So when we go into this situation where we are now in a brand new environment with new groups, etc., we're at a disadvantage. And so if you're in this new group, this new setting, with people you've never met before, and you're hearing conversations, and you are a wallflower, and you are watching everything going on, how are you going to get engaged? How are you going to start conversations? How are you going to show your value, your worth? Okay? Also, in business, when you are out meeting new people, clients, customers, coworkers for the first time, it's important for us to communicate with them. It's important for us to have the conversations, to gain rapport, to show empathy. And that's why we're focusing on those first, saying sorry. That could be the first impression somebody hears from you or sees you from you or gets from you. So we need to be very careful and prescriptive about the words that we are saying. Now, there are some downsides of being too empathetic, right? Putting yourself in someone else's shoes is beneficial, but if you regularly put the feelings and perspective of others above their own, you may start to experience feelings of emptiness or alienation or developing a general anxiety. And so from that perspective, that's another reason why we want to stop saying sorry. We want to, because when we do that, if you know what we learned in the first segment where we were talking about self-confidence, self-esteem, showing that we were at fault for something, that's not a good way to build confidence. That's not a good way to walk into the room and show people that you own the room, you own who you are, and you know who you are. So empathy is incredibly important. It is something that we want to develop and can be used to help us in achieving our goals and objectives. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. When we come back, we're going to talk about why empathy is so good for us and for business. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. Show is called My Strategy. Today we're talking about stop apologizing and start using this technique instead. Right before the break, we were talking about empathy and how empathy is a good skill for us to have. And I think it's important to note that and ruminate on the fact that it's more difficult to have empathy for someone who is outside of one of those groups to which we belong. So because it is more difficult to have empathy for those people, and they're going to have less inclination to be empathetic for us, we need to be strategic about this. We need to find techniques and tactics that we can use to help us reach goals and objectives, overcome that natural disadvantage. So before the break, we were talking about empathy, and it's generally good. It's a great skill to have for us interpersonally. I want to talk a little bit about why empathy is good for business. And this is, not only, all sorts of business. And I've got an article here that talks about that. And so essentially it talks about empathy is good for business. Starts off by saying that it's easy to be cynical these days. A 24/7 news cycle brings us images and extreme headlines about tragedies almost as soon as they occur. If you listen to the rhetoric, it's easy to believe violence, sexism, ageism, xenophobia, and prejudice are winning the day. However, there is another, more positive way to look at this. We have access to information from around the globe instantaneously, and it gives us the opportunities to consider the needs of others and to respond with compassionate action. Playing to our emotions is the cable news and social media business model, but what we choose to do with our emotions is up to us. So why not use empathy? And I like where the author is going with this, because if you think about it, there has been this change happening over many years where we are becoming more cynical. We are being divided. We are being put into camps or groups. And as a result of being put into those camps or groups, we might feel that our camp is the best. We might feel that only the people in our camp matter. And if we do that, we will feel secure, but that is a tribal response. And the challenge with that is that while we are so comfortable and we start to, not like others in that group, in other groups, we potentially could impact our ability to accomplish goals, to be successful. And so from that perspective, when you're in a situation where, you have to grow beyond the community that you're in, we need to have additional skills to deal with that. So, it's like if you were a salesperson or you were doing business and you only did business with the people in your immediate family, right? You only did business with the people in your family, and that's a very small subset of people that, let's say live in the house with you. Well, if you're constantly just thinking about those few people in the house, you're limited. And so as a result of that, because we're being divided, because we're developing these camps, but we need to be able to accomplish goals and objectives. We need to be able to interact with people in these other camps and these other communities. And so what I'm suggesting is that because of the fact that it is being increasingly difficult, and we now naturally are having a harder time engaging, interacting with people, part of it's because social distancing's in place. We now need these skills more than ever. So let's talk quickly about why this is good. Number one, increased empathy can increase sales, loyalty, and referrals. Now, every skilled salesperson knows that the key to closing sales is anticipating your customers' needs and demonstrating how your product or service will suit their best needs. Truly understand the customer's needs means reflecting on their fears, desires, pain points, and whatever keeps them up at night. Now, we're not always talking about selling things in this show. This is about personal development, but we have to sell ourselves. Next one is accelerating productivity and innovation. When customers perceive your company as empathetic, and we're going to substitute with company as you, because you are the product today, you will see sales increase. But wait, there's more. Employees with strong empathy skills are more productive and innovative. This means that you want to increase efficiency and expand the number of problems you can solve for customers or others. Greater competitive advantage and market value. The highest performing companies also top the list of the most empathetic companies. This might seem surprising at first. Don't you have to be cutthroat and willing to win at any cost to be competitive in this globalist capitalistic economy? Well, if you've been paying attention, the answer will be obvious. In fact, statistics show that empathy is more important to business than it ever has been. Number 4, expanded engagement and collaboration. So if the best managers and teams express empathy and a willingness to act compassionately towards others, it stands to reason that companies with a culture that encourage empathy would attract highly engaged individuals. And that data shows that empathetic companies have a better retention and higher morale amongst employees. It goes on to give us lots of data about how millennials are impacted, as well as goes on to talk about some other studies with the Queen's School of Business and more. So the net here is that we can benefit, or companies can benefit, when they start to become more empathetic. And so from a personal development perspective, what we want to do is we want to take and use these techniques, use these strategies to help us be more effective in some way. I don't know what it is you want to be better at. Only you know what it is that you want to be better at. And what needs to happen is you need to take a look at this and say, is what I am doing today impacting my ability to get to my desired state, my future state? And if it is, then what we want to do is we need to identify that this is an area we need to focus on. If it is, we assess that area. We then need to determine what are those courses of action. So we're talking today about not saying sorry and using this important technique. I've talked so much about it, and the good news is that after this break, we are going to get into the real meat of the conversation, which is the feel, felt, found strategy. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. Show is called My Strategy, And we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Well, if you're just joining us, welcome. My strategy radio episodes are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today we've been talking about stop apologizing and start using this technique instead. We've talked about how important empathy is. It's one of those skills that we all need to have. How empathy is very good for business. And we've finally gotten to the meat of the conversation. I asked you to stop saying sorry. So if you don't say sorry, now you can say sorry when you have done something truly wrong, but the feel, felt, found technique or method is something that we can use to help increase our positive response from those people we are working with. So, I've got an article here, title, very apropos, Feel, Felt, Found Technique. Many articles out there on this. It starts off by saying, Feel, Felt, Found would be a well-known objective handling technique to any of you who have been involved in sales for some time. It is a technique that has been used for many, many years. This gives rise to advantages and disadvantages. So just for a review, they said of the method, let's go through an example. So here's the example. So this is a sales situation. But keeping in mind that we can apply this to many, many other situations. And you're going to want to personalize this because since this is a method that's been used many times, we want to develop our own strategy. So you're going to test it out, try it out a bit, and then see how this works for you. And we're using this instead of saying sorry. So it says, let's say, for example, your prospect says something like, the prospect is somebody who you are trying to basically connect with to sell your product or service. So you're meeting them for the first time, or they're new to you. All right. So the prospect says something like, I'd love to start using your service, but we can't afford it. Now, in the past, we might say we're sorry, but we're not going to say sorry. So what they did was they did a little bit of a feel, felt, found technique. So it would go like this. Rather than saying sorry, you would say, I understand how you feel. Mr. Jones over at Allied Inc. felt the same way for a long time. And then, after he started using our service, he found that the added cost was minimal and was far outweighed by the benefits of our premium service. This is quite an effective tact for dealing with sales objectives, as they're saying. So as you can see, rather than, when the prospect says, I just can't afford your service, your natural tendency might be to say, I'm sorry. But they're changing it up a bit. They're saying, I understand how you feel. That's present tense. I understand how you feel. Mr. Jones over at Allied Inc. felt the same way for a long time, which means this was something that was a past objective. Then Mr. Jones started using our service where he found it that was the added cost was minimal and that it outweighed the benefits. So then they go on to talk about why this works. So the question becomes, why does the feel, felt, found work? And can we use something similar to get similar or better results? And the author says they believe this method or technique works in handling objections for several reasons. In understanding how they feel, you build empathy and rapport with them rather than confronting their belief. And this is important because remember when I said with empathy, it is easier to have empathy in a similar group and harder to gain empathy from somebody in an external group. So we don't have a lot of time to gain empathy with somebody we are just meeting for the first time, and that's what the prospect is. You are letting them know that this initial thought is common, and it puts them at ease and lets them know that they are part of a group. When they are attached to that group, so now you've put them in that little group, then you move the whole group by telling how the person in the group bought and changed their mind. So this is using social influence to impact or affect the buy. And that's where the verbiage and the tenses that you use is important. I understand how you feel. I understand. Present tense. Mr. Jones over at Allied felt the same way. Well, that's past tense. But then he started using our service. So what they're saying here is that the people that were in that group where the prospect says, I'd love to use your service, but it's expensive, there's a community. This prospect now has a community of other people who said, I can't afford it. So when we do that, this is using social proof to influence them to buy. It continues. By giving details about what others found, you add motivation for them to buy. Don't just say everything was fine. Oh, it was fine. It was great. That is not going to put them in that social group, which they need. That comfort, that sense of belonging, to know that others in that group came out ahead. In other words, it paces the prospect's current experience and then leads them to consider the experience from a different point of view. It also works on the subconscious level. Feel, felt, found also, it sells directly via the quotes or experience to the other customer. It tells a story, and everybody loves to listen to a story. Children love it. People standing around at parties love it. People lean over the fence to tell stories. We are natural storytellers. The minute you start talking with the experience about the experience of another person, and now use your product or service to get your prospect involved in the story. This is important. We are social beings. We love stories. We love to hear things. And what they're saying here is that by using this simple technique, we can put together a story that is going to give us the ability to gain empathy early on, get them to feel like they are in a group, and when they are in that group, there is comfort in that group. And so they naturally then proceed with the buying process. Now, from a personal development perspective, I don't know how you want to use this, right? It might be, meeting somebody new at work. It could be getting a raise. It could be a lot of different things. But that's what we want to start thinking about, is how are we going to apply that to our personal development goals? You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about building your customer empathy strategy with Feel, Felt, Found. We'll be right back. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this edition of My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Right before the break, we were talking about the Feel, Felt, Found strategy and how we can use it to help us gain rapport, express empathy with somebody that we have just met. And so the question now is, how are we going to build a strategy around what we have learned? Early on in the show, we were talking about, saying sorry and how that might not always, be the best approach. It shows that we are perhaps guilty of something, or the company that we work for is guilty of something, so we don't want to do that. So we talked about Feel, Felt, Found, and how that can help a customer, a prospect, a person who you most likely have never met. You wouldn't be using this on somebody that you already have that relationship with, or you could. Maybe it would work there, but most of the time this is meeting new people. So we're talking about that, and I want to touch a little bit on, some of the advantages and disadvantages. Because, as there are advantages to using a technique, there are always a time and a place to use it. So we know that we can gain rapport. We can get, open ourselves up to new groups, and you never know where that connection can lead you. But there are disadvantages. So the advantages are that this technique is easy to use and has been used for a long time. It also creates a problem because it has been used for such a long time. An experienced buyer might recognize it. And as with the trouble of any scripted approach like this, it could be easy to spot. There's also danger that because it's so simple that a person will overuse the technique and try to answer every objection with it. There is another concern. If you are not genuine and don't really care about the customer, they will detect that with their BS detector, and it will break the rapport rather than building support. So, from our perspective, from a personal development perspective, from a strategy perspective, this is one of those techniques that we can use. It is an effective technique. It is not something that you can script and just go out and use. You have to practice it. So, if I were to coach you and tell you, should you be using feel, felt, found, what I might suggest, if you're new to it, is first listen to the active listening podcast. Learn about that technique. Because if you can get in front of someone and you can active listen, ask questions, truly be interested and engaged in what that person is saying, that is going to also help you build rapport. And then as you need to persuade them to a specific outcome or get them on your side directionally, then you can come in with the feel, felt, found. Verbiage, the tense, is important. And because it's simple enough, but there are some nuances to it, it does take some practice. So that's really, what we want to be thinking about with regard to any of these techniques, right? We want to know them. We want to be able to practice, or we should be practicing them. But we also have to know there's a time and a place for them. So a little bit more on that. Got another article here that talks about the feel, felt, found strategy and how it can impact us. So there's lots and lots of articles out there. Here they talk about an example. Have you started a sales call with, "Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you," or "I'm sorry we keep calling you," followed by a quickly by your sales pitch. Again, it's an example of they're using sorry too much, and that really is going to impact your effectiveness. And if we're not effective and we're not out there meeting people outside of our groups, we limit our growth potential. So that is why this is so important. Another article here talks about how people naturally want to be heard. Simply listening to a customer's complaint is not enough. Customers need confirmation that what they said was received, and it's not just a sounding board. So that's where acknowledge that you've heard their concern. You don't have to be a wordsmith to make this strategy effective. You can do this simply by repeating back what they said and including the words feel. Now, this is simple enough, right? Rather than having to rehearse this, you reiterate to them what they told you. You repeat it back to them and just say, "It sounds like what I heard was that you feel," and then just iterate back to them what they had told you. That's an easy way to do it, right? An example here is a customer tells you your prices are too high. And a common response to this complaint might go into an explanation about the value of what they are getting for the cost. And the problem is that the customer is not connecting cost and the value in the same way you are. Chances are pretty good that you won't make the sale because you're arguing two different points. You've put yourself in an argumentative state. And now the customer can come back to you with point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint. And now you're playing a match, a tennis match. And you're not going to win because you're not going to have the facts, the data to support it potentially. Instead, start by saying something like, I understand that you feel the prices are too high, right? That's not going to cause any concerns. It's not going to escalate into a back and forth on point, counterpoint. And if you think about it, our daily interactions work this way as well. When you're having conversations with somebody, and it might just be somebody who is in your inner circle, if you are throwing facts and data back and forth, that person is receiving the fact, and they are judging you based on that fact or that point that you provide their way. So if we change the perspective from, point, counterpoint, and start focusing on the feel, we can help that other person realize that there is a group out there that they can associate with that has the same feeling. The next step is going to be to figure out who else had that feeling and what did they do to solve that problem. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Going to take a quick break, and we'll be back. Hello, welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. The show is called My Strategy, and we're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Well, I hope you're having a great day. My Strategy radio show episodes are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today we've been talking about stop apologizing and start using this technique instead. And we're slowly working our way down to building our strategy and putting in a plan in place to help us accomplish our goals. Right before the break, we were talking about how you can build empathy with the feel, felt, found technique, and how we need to really start to think about ways that we can approach people in our conversations so that they feel that they are part of a group. And when they feel that we see them in a group where there's another group of people like them, and in that group, somebody in that group that they are now a part of found a solution to a problem, that naturally is going to get them interested in learning about how that problem was solved. And we're all, we're all being classified and put into various groups, probably, throughout the existence of the human race. And I think, now it's becoming a little bit more apparent, right? Things happen in sine waves. You have, fads, fashions come back. So do, talking points and what we do. It's just part of the natural societal evolution. So what we want to do is we want to find ways that we can use this to our advantage. So, we're talking about before the break some of those examples of what others did to help solve a problem for the group that they were in. And so this article goes on here to say, using the feel, felt, found technique or modified process takes some practice, but the results can be well worth it. So today you're learning about feel, felt, found, but that's just the beginning. You're going to have to practice it over the coming weeks. Practice what you are going to say. Now, in your daily interactions, you could meet somebody And you could just start simply by, if they have a complaint, say, oh, I understand, this is how you feel. Reiterate back to them what they have said. And if you just get into that little habit of just starting there with the feel, you can then, over time, add in the other pieces. Because it's hard from a felt perspective if you don't have a large common knowledge of other people who are in a group associated with the person you're speaking with. So that could be a credibility killer there. If you say, oh, I understand you feel, you repeat back to them, and then you start to say, there were others who felt this way, and they'll say, oh yeah, well, who? What were their names? And if you don't have a list of people who felt that way, you've put yourself in a box, and you're not going to be able to answer that question, so you're not going to have credibility. So as you're using this technique, if you don't have another group of people to associate with that person, in some cases it's okay to say, I don't know anybody who's been in that situation. I'm not saying you tell them this directly, but that's a data point for you. It's something that you can now think about and use potentially for next time. Now that you've run into somebody with this feeling and they belong to this group, put that in your memory banks, and that is going to be an example that you can use going forward. So it is a process. It is something that is simple enough with feel, felt, found, but you have to test it out. And it's going to take some time. What I can tell you is that as you use this approach, or an active listening approach, these are great techniques to gain rapport with people. They're conversation starters. They're showing that you have commonality with people. They're showing that you understand them, and we all want to be understood. Now, is this a technique that I would suggest you go out and start using today? Potentially. I think you should start small. What we want to start thinking about, though, is what is our systematic approach? How do we approach problem solving? And those who listen to the show know that I've got a 5-step process. It's awareness, assess and analyze, strategize and plan, implement and support, and evaluation. So from an awareness perspective, what's our vision, goals? What is it that we want to achieve? So we know that there's something we want to achieve from a personal development perspective. I want to network with people in a specific industry so that I can get a new position in an industry or with a company. So let's say that was your goal. Well, then you need to assess and analyze. And I'm saying do this lightning speed. But if you are having problems in introducing yourself, getting into the right circles, figuring out how to get closer to those circles, then you've identified a problem statement that needs to be solved. And you could solve that with active listening or feel, felt, found. So let's say, for example, you want to get into an industry, you have no connections. You could go to LinkedIn and identify who's in those industry. You could either get in through a referral, or you could come up with a way to reach out to people in the industry, start those conversations. And when you start those conversations, you are adding bits and pieces to that database. People like to be listened to. If you can find a way to get somebody on a Skype, on a call, start having that conversation, you're starting to build data. You're starting to find insights. And the next conversation you have with somebody, now you can start to use the technique. Let's say, for example, you reached out to 5 people in an industry, and you were talking with the first person about some feeling that they had. And as a result of that feeling, they accomplished a goal, or they were able to come to a solution. Well, if you talk to you talk to the first person and they had this one scenario. You talk to the second person, they might have had a second scenario. When you get the third person on the phone, if they have a similar problem statement to what the first person said, you have a data point. You have the ability to use feel, felt found, because you can reference the conversation that you had with the first person that you spoke with who said they are running into this particular scenario. So all of this is going to build upon itself. It is going to take a concentrated effort. You're going to need to make sure that you are thinking about how and when you will be implementing this. So then we want to implement it. We want to implement it, and once we implement it, we then need to test it. What is the support? What's the evaluation? Now, I've gone through these 5 steps, and it's taken us several minutes to get through those 5 steps. At the end of the day, you should be able to get through those steps very quickly. It should almost be just something you kind of iterate through. And so if we go through those steps and identify that we need to be able to connect to people, and in order to connect to people, we need to show empathy, that's where we can use the feel, felt, found technique to start conversations, to gather data, and then in continuing to use this, we can start to sell that service. Now, in this case, that service is us, right? We're trying to get connected to another industry. So I think it's important for us to start thinking about how often we are saying sorry. Sorry is a bad habit that we all can get into. Now, that's not saying we don't ever use it, but it is something that we need to use judiciously. And empathy is one of those skills that we can use to help show others that we understand where they are, that we are part of that group, because naturally people do not tend to trust those outside of their group. Now, we know that there are many benefits for empathy. It's good for business, especially in today's cynical world. So one strategy we can use is feel, felt, found. This is a strategy that has been time-tested. Salespeople have used it for many years. There are some downsides because it can come across as being scripted, and if you haven't built your database, your data bank of examples, you can get stuck pretty easily. So what we suggest is, number one, make sure that using this approach is going to help you. It is something that can get you to your goal, to your objective. Once you have that, you start extremely simply by, in your conversations, say to people, from what I hear, you feel that, and just repeat what they said. And in doing so, that is going to give you a starting point for better interpersonal communication and will ultimately help you. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Been great to be here with you. Hope you have a good rest of your week, and take care.